Service confirming it was a meteorite that flashed over the sky in the Midwest early this morning. Susanna Song joining us live from Chicago's museum campus with that story. Good morning, Susanna.
Good morning, Lionel. Imagine a rock the size of a car falling from the sky. Well, that's what many of you saw. A meteor that was traveling about 45,000 miles an hour. It then exploded about 10 miles up into the sky and then fell into the water in Lake Michigan near Wisconsin.
In a rare convergence of elements, a prenumbral lunar eclipse, a full snow moon, and a comet will all be on full display in most parts of the world. First up is the eclipse, which will present itself as a darkening of the moon as it passes through the weakest part of the Earth's shadow. Prime viewing is at 4:43 p.m. Pacific time and will dissipate until it completes. Comet 45P is next, and although it's been visible through telescopes for weeks now, it will be at its closest point the morning of February 11th. You won't be able to see it with the naked eye, but should see it in the constellation of Hercules through either binoculars or a telescope.
A powerful earthquake in the southern Philippines has killed at least 6 people and injured nearly 100 others. The earthquake measured a magnitude 6.7, according to the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology. It shook the country's southern region late on Friday. The quake's epicenter was close to the city of Surigao at a relatively shallow depth of 11 kilometers. Hundreds of residents fled to safety as buildings were damaged and power supply was cut off. Officials say nearly 100 aftershocks have been felt. Schools have been used as evacuation centers for those affected.
Now, in really rather worrying news, a cleaning robot sent into Japan's Fukushima nuclear plant had to be pulled out from its mission due to technical glitches most likely caused by ultra-high radiation levels. Based on analysis of images from the robot-mounted cameras, the radiation reading inside the number 2 reactor at the number 1 nuclear plant was 650 sieverts an hour. During a similar probe late last month, Tokyo Electric Power Company estimated the radiation in the primary containment vessel to be 530 sieverts an hour. The robot entered the reactor on Thursday for the first time since the March 2011 earthquake and tsunami to inspect and clean a passage before further examinations. Despite the absolutely off-the-charts figures, which can kill a person almost instantly, TEPCO officials insist radiation is not leaking outside of the utility.
In New Zealand, more than 300 whales have died in what's being called one of the country's largest known strandings of whales in years. It happened at the popular holiday destination of Golden Bay. Rescuers tried to help more than 100 whales return to sea, but around half got stuck again. The bay's shallow waters make it difficult for the mammals to get back.
Next tonight here, the major concern near America's tallest dam, a giant hole in the spillway, is growing in size tonight. Here's ABC's Neil Karlinski.
Tonight, officials in California have the nation's tallest dam under a microscope, worried about this massive hole that's formed nearby. The Oroville Dam holds water back from Lake Oroville, now at record levels and in danger of spilling over after a series of storms. The 200-foot-long, 30-foot-deep hole is enormous, dwarfing the engineers who climbed in for a look this week. It eroded through the concrete spillway used to release water and keep the lake from topping its banks.
This is a big deal. We're very concerned that we manage this properly to protect the public down below.
Here's the problem. If the spillway can't release enough water now, officials will have to try a never-before-used emergency spillway.
We're monitoring 24/7. If any changes occur that could result in any kind of danger to the public, we will immediately notify the public.
The Oroville Dam are expected to hit record levels. Right now, water continues to gush over this damaged spillway. Reporter Sean Bennett is in Butte County with more.
What a difference a day makes. Yesterday, we could actually see where the erosion took place, and we could actually see the rest of the spillway. Today, you can't even see it. Now that water rushing right off to the right side of the spillway on top of the actual hillside, and those rocks racing down into the river. Now, history will be made at Lake Oroville Dam this weekend, according to officials with the Department of Water Resources. The water level is expected to hit the 900-foot capacity in the early morning hours of either Saturday or Sunday. Now, the DWR officials say it will likely go over the emergency spillway, something that's never happened in the 48-year history of the dam. Now, back in 1997, the water came within a foot, but never actually went over the emergency spillway. DWR officials say crews are working to clear debris ahead of the water spilling over. Now, the hole in the spillway continues to grow. Engineers say they plan to continue using it to lower lake levels.
Geographic data says California will have a mega flood about every 1 to 200 years. So we're overdue, long overdue.
In the San Francisco Bay Area, there are over 350,000 people that live in the 100-year floodplain, and I'm sure the vast majority of them don't realize that they're living in an area that's at risk.
Losses could be over $700 billion, leaving millions homeless. And it's not just rainfall. Coastal flooding could crumble the Bay Area's outdated levees, leaving safe travel and clean water a distant memory.
The Pew Research Center says only a third of Americans say that being truly American means following the Christian faith. The study showed that 32% of Americans say being Christian is very important to national identity. More Republicans were reported to say Christianity is essential to being truly American, while 29% of Democrats agreed.
Could hypnosis settle your problem child?
CBS 2's Suzanne Marquez shows us the trend some say may be going too far.
Your eyes begin to get very tired.
10-year-old Eric Ferrer Alfaro is about to be hypnotized.
And close your eyes when you're ready.
He has ADHD and struggles with focusing in school. His mother doesn't want to medicate him, and so far, nothing else has worked.
I'm hoping for the teacher to not call me anymore.
Everybody calls me Hypno Mom.
Hypnotherapist Lisa Mackenberg says she's hypnotized close to 1,000 children, including her own.
I started hypnotizing the children at 7 months to sleep quickly, calmly, soundly, and deeply all through the night.
She says that she's essentially teaching Eric to hypnotize himself.
Breathe in the word focus. Exhale on the word powerful. When he needs to curb his impulses, all he needs to do is breathe in that power word, and it resets the neurons.
I hope it'll help me because tomorrow I'll have a lot of division and a lot of tests on math.
But not everyone agrees that hypnosis is the answer.
It's a very risky thing to do.
Psychologist Dr. Sanam Hafiz says putting kids in a trance is going too far.
The idea is not to gain control of your child's mind, but it's to teach them what's right, what's appropriate, what's desirable, so they can then have control over their own mind.
That show was so much fun.
For 15-year-old Tyler Reed and his friend, 18-year-old Colin.
I don't think so.
The road to true self began with family. But the journey for these transgender teens also includes exploring medical options to transition.
I really look forward to facial hair and my voice being lower.
Like help close this gap between how I feel inside and how I look on the outside.
And we have some questions.
To do so, families work closely with gender therapists.
You have to tell them what's going on in your head, and a lot of the time you don't even know.
And doctors like Carol Malazzo, who was among the first in the Sacramento area to treat children diagnosed with gender dysphoria, born one sex but identifying as another.
A person's gender identity is pretty much fixed by the time that they're 3 years of age, and there's no way that you can actually change them.
The pediatrician recognized the need for trans youth more than a decade ago, and to date, she has cared for hundreds of young patients.
California is a hotbed for one of the fastest growing crimes in the world. Sex trafficking. It's the second largest underground economy in San Diego, pulling in profits of almost $900 million a year. It's a business so big that law enforcement is welcoming the help of private investigators who have one thing in common. They're all former special ops. This team is trained to track,
if we catch them outside,
extract,
get some audio,
and get out without anyone knowing they were there. These are former Navy SEALs, cops, and British Special Forces, now working as private investigators
going to the target
to help rescue victims of sex trafficking.
They're so well trained to blend in on surveillance because you know what they do when they're on the SEAL teams is they basically kidnap people.
Joseph Travers, a former police officer, started Saved in America, bringing in men with special skills. Every night in San Diego County, there's an estimated 2,500 kids who are missing. And the clock is ticking for each one of them because it's a race between those trying to rescue them and those trying to trap them. Tonight's goal for the rescuers, a teenage girl we'll call Kylie. Like 80% of all local sex trafficking victims, she's American.
Copy in position.
Kylie is 15, a year younger than the average age of a girl caught up in trafficking.
We think, from the intelligence we have, they're trying to take her south of the border.
Intelligence taken from the web and revealing her possible whereabouts.
Okay, guys, there's movement in the front window.
Law enforcement called in.
PD's been notified.
The ghosts back out.
10-4 copy.
And Kylie is rescued, one of 26 teenagers in 26 months saved by Saved in America.
The humanitarian aid industry has a sexual assault problem and doesn't seem to be doing anything about it. Lots of industries have the same issue, but the humanitarian community doesn't seem to be recognizing it as much. The research says female aid workers are most frequently assaulted by male coworkers and superiors. It also says those assaults are underreported, and women who do report say they lose more respect than their assaulter. LGBTQ aid workers say they face threats and are harassed because of who they are. Most aid organizations don't have policies on how to respond to sexual assault or how to prevent it. That can mean a few things. Victim blaming can happen, there's not enough training and enforcement, or there's no clear way for survivors to document an assault.
This once grand park, Pedion tu Arios, has become notorious for its night trade. Young male refugees gather in the shadows, selling sex and drugs. This man was in the Afghan police force. His two brothers were killed by the Taliban. He studied law at university. Now he sells sex.
When did you decide that you would have to sell sex to survive?
When I finish money, I try to find one job. For example, every day 10 euro if I can find. Never I did this, but a lot of time about this, before days I try to kill myself here inside this park. When I go, for example, I die. I swear I cry.
During the day, it's a different scene. Refugees are sharing the park with Greeks, walking their dogs and jogging. Many Greeks have become used to seeing so many foreigners in the city.
Ever since the refugee crisis started, people have done whatever they could to survive. And for some refugees, that means selling sex. What's different now is the number of people involved and the fact that it's becoming more organised.
Violence has erupted on the edge of Paris and spread to at least 5 nearby towns amid a public outcry over the alleged rape of a young black man by police. Several nights of clashes have broken out after 4 police officers purportedly forced a 22-year-old man to the ground, beat him, and anally raped him with a baton at a housing estate in the northern Paris suburb of Aulnay-sous-Bois. The officers were suspended pending an inquiry into accusations that they used excessive force while arresting the young man during an identity check last week.
Il prend sa matraque et il me l'a enfoncé dans les fesses, volontairement. Bamboula, le Salab.
Justice! Justice! Qu'on arrête de dire que nos enfants sont des voleurs, qu'on arrête de dire que nos enfants sont des dealers. Les policiers n'ont pas à faire leur propre justice.
A wave of violent crime continues in the Brazilian state of Espírito Santo, where police have gone on strike. Despite the presence of 1,200 soldiers and federal police officers, with more on the way, the state is still racked with violence. Vitoria, the urban state capital, is usually patrolled by around 1,800 police. Officers went on strike over a 4-year-long salary freeze. According to the police union, over 100 people have been reported killed since the strike began on February 4th, putting the daily murder rate 6 times higher than average. It is also estimated that businesses have lost almost $29 million since the strike began. Meanwhile, schools, businesses, and public transportation remain closed. Representatives of the police met with state officials on Wednesday and demanded that every officer's salary be doubled.
A spike in murders in Brazil as soldiers patrol the streets in Espírito Santo state. More than 100 homicides reported in just 6 days after police walked off the job, demanding better pay. Schools and shops are now closed. Public transportation ground to a halt as the military tries to contain chaos. Some citizens are running scared.
My father is coming to pick me up. I'm leaving. I won't stay here.
Most of the violence is happening here in the state capital, Vitoria, a wealthy port city ringed with golden beaches. But normally crowded cafes are now empty, with visitors staying away amid security fears.
There's been a drop in customers, and we've also seen problems with trying to leave certain areas. There are no buses, there's no security for getting home safely. Business is complicated.
Brazil is in the midst of an economic crunch, making it tough to keep even basic public services going. There are now fears the strikes could spread to other states struggling to pay their police.
A collapsing currency has led to economic anguish in Venezuela. Sky-high inflation has caused prices to double every 18 days, and citizens line up to exchange money that is almost useless.
Inflation has totally ruined us. You'd think this cash is enough to do things, but it's not. It's worth nothing. These bills are devalued.
In Venezuela, where an estimated 110,000 people in 2015 were living with HIV, a shortage of critical medicines, including life-saving anti-HIV drugs, threatens a country already in crisis. In June of 2016, a network of Venezuelans living with HIV sought urgent humanitarian aid from the Geneva-based Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. The petition notes that in addition to a severe stockout of antiretroviral treatment, Venezuela lacks a necessary supply of condoms, HIV test kits, or basic supplies to diagnose and treat tuberculosis. The Global Fund leaders, who notably took 6 months to reply to the original urgent request for help, have responded that they have liaised with our partner network to see who might be in a position to help.
Lots of kids hate vegetables. Now, children in the Eurozone may be in luck. There's a vegetable shortage rolling across parts of northern Europe, making it harder for shoppers to get their hands on fresh produce. Veggies like spinach and zucchini started vanishing from grocery store shelves across Great Britain in early January. 4 of Britain's biggest grocery chains have even started to ration iceberg lettuce. Meanwhile, broccoli, cauliflower, eggplant, peppers, and cabbage are in short supply in Denmark, France, and the Netherlands. Bad weather in a corner of Spain that supplies much of Europe in the colder months is largely to blame for the shortage. In Germany, the price of fresh vegetables jumped more than 18% in December. The UK grocery chain Sainsbury's is charging around $1.75 for a head of lettuce, more than 3 times the price in pre-shortage days.
A plague of vast proportions. Countless locusts have swarmed Bolivia, causing the government to raise the alarm.
We have declared a state of emergency. We have decided to issue a supreme decree.
The arrival of these unwelcome visitors happened a week ago near Santa Cruz. They've already wiped out almost 1,100 hectares of corn, peanut, and soybeans. Authorities are warning that the locusts could destroy the country's main agricultural region, which supplies more than 80% of Bolivia's food.
People are very scared here by the locusts. These bugs have done a lot of damage, eating all the production of maize, beans, squash, and watermelons. Also yucca production. All this production was destroyed.
The government says fumigation must begin straight away. Pesticides are being sprayed on the ground and in the skies. But even with all these efforts, the locusts are spreading quickly. The question is, how much damage will they do before they're eradicated?
An invasive caterpillar species is spreading across Africa and devastating crops. The fall armyworm, native to North and South America, appeared in Africa for the first time last year. Scientists say it likely arrived on commercial airliners. Non-native armyworms are now spreading rapidly. They've already been confirmed in countries across southern and western Africa. They pose a major threat to agriculture. Maize, an important staple across much of Africa, is especially vulnerable. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization says fall armyworms have destroyed up to 73% of crops in some areas. Fall armyworms are also difficult to control using pesticides. In a statement released Monday, February 6th, the Center for Agriculture and Biosciences International said the caterpillar could, quote, spread to tropical Asia and the Mediterranean in the next few years.
The United Nations says it is ready to support Kenya after the country declared its drought a national disaster. The UN statement came Friday, the same day Kenya called for aid to counter the current drought. The Kenyan government said over 2 million people are in urgent need of food assistance. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization warned the country is facing a severe drought and with it rise in a food insecurity. The drought has affected 23 out of 47 countries, posing a major risk to people, livestock, and wildlife. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta called on all stakeholders to support the government by upscaling drought mitigation programs.
In drought-hit Guatemala, those taking a swing at farming are coming up empty. The little that grows here is simply not enough, and it's worrying World Food Program officials like Gustavo Alas. They have had losses from 80 to 85% of their basic grain, he says, which is the main crop here, so they do not have the necessary food in the season where they build up their stock. 3 consecutive years of El Nino-linked drought have exacerbated poverty and hunger in the country of 15 million. The World Food Program, or WFP, says the European Union will invest $4.2 million to support families most affected by droughts, including subsistence farmers like those here in Guatemala. The investment aims to improve land productivity and food security, though WFP recognizes despite the intervention, 5 to 10% of farmers and their families will resort to immigration.
In this remote village, images of dusty paddocks and flies buzzing over carcasses. And not far from here, a herder is watering his animals, trying to salvage what remains of his herd, as a devastating drought continues to displace thousands in several parts of Somalia and Ethiopia. These displaced families shelter under this tree near Banderbela, in the Puntland state of northeastern Somalia, after walking for days with their animals. More than 25,000 drought-affected persons have arrived here over the past months.
Que el Señor de la Misericordia, venga, Señor de la Misericordia. Ay, mirando aquí, aquí también se ve. Ay, sí. Mirando aquí se ve, mira, ve. Ay, en los puentes también se ven. Ay, mirando, mirando, ve. Mirando ahí. Bendito seas tú, Señor Dios Padre Todopoderoso. Misericordioso. Ay, qué hermoso, Dios mío, alabanza, gloria a tu Señor. Mira cómo se ve bonito el Señor de la Misericordia ahí. Lo ve. Gloria a ti, Señor. Estará grabando, no sé qué sabe. Él está grabando. Estará grabando.
250 following a giant landslide that sent mud and debris crashing onto homes in southwest Colombia. Hundreds more men, women and children are injured and missing, with a state of emergency declared in the region around the small city of Mocoa, where hours of torrential rain caused rivers to overflow, triggering what's being called an avalanche of muddy water. The military has been deployed in a giant rescue operation, and Colombia's president has travelled to the disaster zone. Admitting authorities don't know how many people are under the mud, he said, "We continue to search. The first thing I'd like to say is that my heart, our hearts and the hearts of all Colombians are with the victims of this tragedy." Landslides are not uncommon in Colombia, but the scale of this disaster is daunting. And as efforts to find survivors continue, the fear and the warning is that the death toll is likely to rise further.
The landslide struck in the middle of the night after hours of heavy rainfall, which caused the rivers there to burst their banks, flooding homes with mud. We know that more than 100 people have been killed so far. An unknown number are missing. Reports that an army officer there has said that the local hospital is struggling to cope with the scale of this situation, and a state of emergency has in fact been declared. Some reports, as I say, entire neighbourhoods being buried under this. Now, disaster response units are working hard to rescue anyone who might be trapped under the debris also that has been scattered, and also those who are left isolated in homes without electricity or water. There's also known that 2 bridges have been destroyed, making those rescue efforts even more difficult. In total, rescue services have said that there are actually 17 neighbourhoods that have been affected in all this, and it's worth noting that March has been the rainiest month for this country since 2011, and it comes after neighbouring Peru has also been suffering a serious situation with the heavy rainfall and landslides there. We know that more than 90 people have died since the start of year in Peru also. We know that the mayor of Colombia, actually his house has been affected. A lot of mud has been thrown on top of all of the roofs and entire homes, and as I say, the information we're getting coming into us more and more, so we are expecting actually the death toll could rise.
Early hours of this rescue operation, the biggest hurdle facing the search and rescue teams was trying to get access to Mocoa, because many roads were simply washed away in the deluge of water, or they were just blocked. So that prevented a lot of aid reaching the people who needed it most. What we've seen as the day has developed right now, as darkness fell in Mocoa, the search and rescue teams have been using thermal cameras which have been attached to drones, and they've been flying over some of the affected areas, trying to locate the people who are still trapped under the rubble. And the civil defence says that the survivors of this deluge, this massive mudslide, are being temporarily housed in 3 shelters, temporary shelters that have been set up. And the Colombian Air Force are due to deliver more water, aid and medicine to many parts of Mocoa, because a lot of the areas are still without power and still without water. 50 tanker trucks arrived earlier tonight, bringing with them potable water, which is badly needed by some residents.
Hurricane Matthew skirted Florida's east coast, packing 125-mile-per-hour wind gusts and sustained winds of 70 miles per hour. Miami and southern Florida escaped a direct hit, with only minor damage reported. As the storm approached Florida early this morning, it was located further north up the coast, just 45 miles east of Melbourne. The state's leaders made clear this powerful hurricane was a deadly danger.
Unfortunately, this is going to kill people.
Governor Rick Scott ordered an evacuation of 1.5 million Floridians living along the eastern coast. Tempers flared among some people as they tried to gas up before getting out.
I saw two guys fighting at a gas station yesterday. Yeah, actually throwing punches.
Those who stayed behind emptied store shelves, and Disney World closed for only the 4th time in its history. And thousands of travelers were stuck as flights were canceled at airports in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Orlando. Already more than 300,000 people were without power as the day began. CBN News anchor John Jessup is in Florida near Cocoa Beach.
As you can see, though, it's still a strong system packing heavy bands of rain and often strong wind gusts. Even though the storm's path has shifted, people are still being urged to stay indoors and off the roads. Countywide curfews went into effect late Thursday and last into Saturday morning, all designed to keep people indoors and off the roads.
Jessup reports the National Hurricane Center says storm surge and destruction will make places along the coast uninhabitable for weeks, possibly months. That's what the storm did as it devastated parts of southern Haiti, leaving thousands homeless and more than 300 people dead. For now, a major concern is that Matthew could turn westward, possibly striking Jacksonville, Florida, and major population areas of the southeast in Georgia and South Carolina.
Going down that Wally World. Going down. It's going down that Wally World, bro. Ooh.
Shepard Smith went way overboard in warning Florida residents to evacuate in preparation for Hurricane Matthew.
See this? Melbourne, Daytona Beach, all the way up to Jacksonville. This moves 20 miles to the west, and you and everyone you know are dead. All of you. Because you can't survive it. It's not possible unless you're very, very lucky. And your kids die too.
Friday, the number of people killed by Hurricane Matthew in Haiti has risen to at least 478 people. The island nation's Central Civil Protection Agency, which takes longer to collate numbers, said 271 people died because of the storm, while over 61,500 remain in shelters. Officials said that food and water were urgently needed, noting that crops have been leveled, wells have been contaminated by seawater, and water treatment facilities have been destroyed. Matthew was the first Category 4 storm to hit Haiti since Hurricane Flora struck in 1963.
To South Korea, where Typhoon Chaba slammed across the country's south, leaving 7 people dead and another 3 missing. The violent storm caused severe flooding in the port of Busan, the country's second largest city, and the industrial city of Ulsan. Dozens of flights in and out of Jeju Island were canceled as Chaba brings gusts of up to 200 kilometers an hour. South Korean authorities say 2,500 schools had been closed, while tens of thousands of homes along the southern coast suffered power outages.
India says its forces have killed 3 suspected militants who were attempting to raid an army base in Kupwawa district in northern Kashmir. A police official said the 3 men were spotted near the de facto border between India and Pakistan. The incident is the latest in a series of attacks that has raised tensions between the 2 countries and left people living near the disputed region living in fear. Residents say some villagers have already fled their homes. Recent clashes began after 19 Indian soldiers were killed last month in an army base attack in Kashmir. Last week, India announced it had carried out strikes against militants camped on the Pakistani side of Kashmir. Islamabad has denied any involvement and vowed to retaliate against any aggression.
Now, the Russian Defense Ministry has cautioned the U.S. military against targeting Syrian government forces in the war-torn country.
I remind the U.S. colleagues that the air defense of the Russian military bases near Homeimim and Tartus is covered by a range of Russia's S-300 and S-400 air defense missile systems, which cover a radius that may be a surprise to any country operating its aircraft over the country. It must be understood that Russian air defense missile crews will unlikely have time to clarify via the hotline the exact flight program of the missiles or the ownership of their carriers, and dilettante illusions about stealth planes could collide with disappointing realities.
A Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov said any U.S. attacks on areas controlled by Syrian government could jeopardize the lives of Russian troops. Tensions have recently flared up between Moscow and Washington since the breakdown of a Syria's ceasefire deal brokered by the two countries.
15 years ago, the U.S. started its military campaign in Afghanistan, and few people foresaw the consequences. America's mission was to rid the country of both al-Qaeda and the Taliban, but more than a decade later, the security situation in Afghanistan is vastly worse than it was as the Taliban consistently strengthens its grip on the nation. Recently, world donors raised $15 billion to fund the country in exchange for political and economic reforms. And this is what Afghanistan is facing right now. An ongoing battle is raging in the northern city of Kunduz. The UN says the humanitarian situation there is rapidly deteriorating, forcing hundreds of people to leave the city. It is reported only one small hospital is proving medical care after another, run by Doctors Without Borders, was destroyed by an U.S. airstrike a year ago. Artis Ganich looks at America's military legacy in a country that the history calls the graveyard of empires.
How many times Americans heard the war in Afghanistan is almost over, almost won, and yet it drags on, more silently than before, but it continues, and Washington keeps changing plans.
The United States will maintain approximately 8,400 troops in Afghanistan into next year through the end of my administration. Together with our allies and the Afghan government, we have agreed that this is the year we will conclude our combat mission in Afghanistan. It is in our vital national interest to send an additional 30,000 U.S. troops to Afghanistan.
I will get our troops home. We will bring an end to this war.
Having crippled al-Qaeda in Afghanistan a long time ago, the U.S. spent years and enormous resources fighting the Taliban. Despite these efforts, the Taliban today is resurgent. It is set to control roughly a third of Afghanistan. And guess what? Terrorists are finding a safe haven there again. ISIL has gained a foothold in Afghanistan. It runs a training camp there, even a school for children. All of which makes one ask, after all the lives sacrificed and resources spent, could Afghanistan be back to square one? One thing that did change dramatically in Afghanistan since the beginning of the war is opium production. It skyrocketed. 90% of heroin in the world now comes from Afghanistan. Roughly a year before the war, the Taliban banned opium cultivation, decided it was un-Islamic. And you see how over the years, it went up 40 times from 2001. The Taliban now actually use drug production as a source of income. The chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, recently described the fight against the Taliban as a stalemate. The insurgents made gains as the U.S. withdrew the bulk of its troops. Washington now calls for a reconciliation with the Taliban. The Taliban do not seem to reciprocate. In April, they admitted